At 38 years old, with an annual salary of $62,000 as a mid-level risk analyst, Jerome felt the sting of humiliation settle deep in his bones. It was a cold, physical thing, a stark contrast to the cloying warmth of the grand ballroom. He was at his wife's annual company gala, an event celebrating the meteoric rise of her tech startup, Innovate Nashville. The room, perched on the 34th floor of a glass tower overlooking the city, glittered with the light of 1,000 tiny crystals hanging from the ceiling, each one probably costing more than his monthly mortgage payment. Renata, his wife, had insisted he come. "It's important for appearances, Jerome," she'd said, not looking up from her phone. But upon arrival, after posing for a single strained photo, she had gestured vaguely towards a small round table near the service exit. "The staff are over there. You can sit with them. Try to look like you belong." He was now seated between a junior graphic designer who looked barely 20 and a nervous intern from the catering company, holding a glass of complimentary and decidedly cheap sparkling wine that cost the company maybe $8 a bottle. His own suit, a perfectly respectable navy blue one he'd bought for $400 at a department store sale, felt like a pauper's rags in a room draped in $8,700 Armani suits and shimmering custom-made gowns. Renata, across the vast expanse of the ballroom, was a vision in a $12,000 crimson dress that clung to her form, her laughter echoing as she charmed a circle of venture capitalists. She hadn't glanced his way once. A man with silver hair and a watch that Jerome recognized as a Patek Philippe, a timepiece that easily cost over $100,000, approached Renata's circle. He nodded towards Jerome's lonely table. Jerome couldn't hear the question, but he could read the man's lips, the slight tilt of his head. He was asking who Jerome was. Renata's response was a casual, dismissive wave of her hand, a gesture she used to shoo away a fly or their daughter's pleas for one more story. Her voice, though softened by the distance, carried an unmistakable edge of condescension that cut through the music and the chatter. "Oh, him?" she said, her laugh a brittle little tinkling sound. "That's nobody you'd know. He just works at a bank." The men around her chuckled politely, their gazes flicking towards him for a brief, pitying moment before dismissing him entirely. "Nobody you'd know. He works at a bank." Jerome looked down at his own hands. The hands that packed his daughter's lunch every morning. The hands that had once held Renata's when they had nothing but a shared dream in a tiny rented apartment. He carefully placed his half-empty glass of $8 sparkling wine down on the white linen tablecloth. The clink was almost silent, lost in the noise of the room. But to Jerome, it sounded like a gavel striking wood. He felt nothing. The humiliation had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, clear, and utterly resolute calm. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that this was the end. He just didn't know yet that the instrument of his liberation was already sitting on his desk, waiting for him. Their life hadn't always been a study in such stark contrast. Before Innovate Nashville, before the venture capital, and the $1.2 million condo on Oakmont Drive, there was just Jerome and Renata. They had met at a small community church picnic in North Nashville, two ambitious young black professionals drawn to each other's quiet determination. He was working his way through night school, aiming for a stable career in finance. She was sketching out business plans on napkins, her eyes alight with a fire that mesmerized him. Their first home was a 900-square-foot apartment above a laundromat on Jefferson Street, where the scent of fabric softener was a constant perfume, and the rent was a manageable $650 a month. He remembered those days with a fondness that felt like a phantom limb. He'd come home from his entry-level job at the credit union, his salary a meager $32,000 a year, and find Renata at their wobbly, second-hand kitchen table, surrounded by papers. He would cook dinner, Simple things like spaghetti with a jar of $3 store-brand sauce or chicken and rice, while she talked a mile a minute about algorithms and user interfaces. "We'll be rich, Jerome," she'd promise, grabbing his hand. "You'll see. I'll buy you a real watch, not that $89 Timex." He'd just smile, kiss her forehead, and be happy with his Timex. It kept perfect time. When their daughter, Maya, was born, the apartment seemed to shrink and expand all at once. It was filled with a new kind of love, a vibrant, noisy joy that centered around this tiny, perfect human. Jerome was the one who mastered the swaddle, who could soothe her cries with a low hum, who walked the floors with her at 3 a.m. when she wouldn't sleep. His deep brown skin was luminous in the glow of the unicorn nightlight Maya insisted on, a $15 purchase from Target that was worth $1 million to her. Renata loved Maya, of course, but she was consumed by her burgeoning company. The seed money started coming in, small amounts at first, $25,000 from a local angel investor, then $50,000 from a city grant. With each infusion of cash, a small piece of their shared life was chiseled away and replaced by something shinier, colder. The first casualty was dinner. Renata started working later, ordering inexpensive takeout, her half of the $2,800 dining room table in their new, larger rental home often empty. Jerome continued to cook, packing Maya's lunches with meticulous care. A turkey sandwich cut into a star shape, a handful of grapes, a note drawn on a napkin. It was an act of service, a quiet declaration of love in a household that was growing louder with the sounds of ambition and quieter with the sounds of intimacy. Then came the first one-pager. Renata was trying to secure a $100,000 line of credit for new servers. The bank was hesitant. She came to Jerome one night, her face a mask of stressed urgency. "Honey, I just need you to sign this. It's a formality. A character guarantee. The bank just needs to see we're a solid family." He glanced at the single sheet of paper. It looked standard enough. He saw his name, her name, the bank's name. He trusted her. He signed it without reading the fine print, his signature a simple act of faith in the woman he loved. The loan went through. A year later, it happened again. This time, it was for a $250,000 equipment lease. The company was growing. She was on the cover of a local business magazine. She presented him with the same-looking one-page form. "The usual, baby, just a quick signature." He was tired, Maya had a slight fever, and he was more focused on the reading on the $20 digital thermometer than on the document in front of him. He signed it again, his pen scratching against the paper in their gleaming kitchen, the recessed lighting glinting off the new $6,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator he never used. He had no idea how wrong he was. He was building a life of quiet domestic normalcy, brick by loving brick, while she was using his trust as collateral for a world he was not invited to enter. Each dollar tag detail of their home, the $4,300 sectional sofa he rarely sat on, the $1,800 espresso machine that only she used, the abstract art on the walls that cost a combined $15,000, felt less like a shared success and more like the price of his own erasure. The cruelty wasn't always as public as the Gala. More often, it was a quiet domestic erosion, a series of small, cutting remarks that chipped away at his sense of self-worth. The outrage accumulated in the silent spaces of their expensive condo, in the moments between her pronouncements and his stunned silence. One Saturday morning, Jerome was in the kitchen making his and Maya's favorite pancake breakfast. Maya, all of 6 years old, sat at the island, her small legs kicking with excitement, the colorful plastic beads on the ends of her intricate braids clicking against the stool. The air smelled of melting butter and sweet batter, a smell that for Jerome was the very essence of fatherhood. Renata swept into the room, already dressed in a $600 set of Lululemon activewear, her phone pressed to her ear. No, Mark. The valuation is non-negotiable. We're looking at a seven-figure seed round minimum, she said, waving a dismissive hand at the pan of sizzling pancakes. She opened the $6,000 refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of cold-pressed green juice that cost $11, and wrinkled her nose. Ugh, Jerome, can you not with the grease smell? I have a Zoom with the board in an hour. I can't smell like a diner. Jerome just flipped a pancake, his hand steady. It's Saturday, Renata. Maya wanted pancakes. Daddy makes the best star pancakes, Maya chimed in, holding up her plastic plate. Renata gave a tight, thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's nice, sweetie. But Mommy is building an empire so you can go to any college you want, not just the local state school. She looked at Jerome, her gaze sweeping over his simple gray sweatshirt and worn jeans. Some of us have to think about the future. The insult was clear. His contributions, his steady $62,000 salary, his love, his pancakes, they were quaint, but ultimately worthless in the face of her grand ambition. The smell of the pancakes suddenly seemed cloying. The joy of the morning curdled. Another time, he had proudly shown her a letter of commendation from his boss at the bank. He'd identified a significant flaw in a commercial lending model, saving the institution a potential seven-figure loss. It was a big deal for him, a validation of his quiet, meticulous work. Look at this, Rena, he said, holding out the paper. She glanced at it for a fraction of a second, her eyes scanning for a dollar amount and finding none. Oh, that's great, honey, she said, her tone dripping with manufactured enthusiasm as she scrolled through emails on her iPad Pro, a $1,200 device. Did you get a bonus? Well, no, not a cash bonus, but it's a big step toward a promotion. Maybe even senior analyst. She finally looked up, her expression one of genuine bewilderment. A promotion to what? To making $70,000 a year? Jerome, my lead programmer just turned down a $180,000 offer from a competitor. My monthly burn rate for salaries is $500,000. Do you see why I can't get excited about your little gold star from the bank? She turned back to her screen. I'm happy for you, really. It's good to have hobbies. Each barb was a deposit in a growing account of resentment, an account Jerome wasn't even aware he was keeping. The most painful moments always involved Maya. For Maya's 6th birthday, Jerome had spent weeks in their small garage, painstakingly building her a custom dollhouse. He'd spent about $200 on wood, paint, and tiny furniture from a craft store. It was a miniature version of their first apartment, a tribute to a time he thought was their foundation. When he revealed it to her, Maya's shriek of joy was the purest sound he had ever heard. Renata arrived home late from a business dinner, stepping into the living room where Jerome and Maya were playing with the new dollhouse. She was carrying a massive, brightly wrapped box. "Happy birthday, my big girl," she announced. Inside was a Dream Space Explorer virtual reality headset, a brand new, cutting-edge toy that retailed for $1,500. "Wow, Mommy," Maya said, her eyes wide. Renata knelt down, pushing Jerome's lovingly crafted dollhouse aside with her foot. "Forget that old thing," she said with a laugh. "This is the future. You can be a princess in a real castle, not some tiny apartment." She looked at Jerome over Maya's head, a triumphant smirk on her face. The message was unmistakable. His heartfelt, handcrafted love was no match for her store-bought, high-tech affection. He watched as Maya, understandably captivated by the flashy new gadget, abandoned the dollhouse. Later that night, long after Maya was asleep, Jerome went downstairs and found the dollhouse pushed into a corner, one of its tiny, hand-painted shutters broken. He knelt and fixed it, the silence of the $1.2 million condo pressing in on him, the outrage a cold, hard knot in his chest. He was being outspent, outmaneuvered, and outsourced in his own family. The gala wasn't a singular event, it was simply the public confirmation of a private, ongoing humiliation. It was the moment the accumulated debt of 1,000 small cruelties finally came due. What do you think? It's a simple question, but in a world of high-stakes business and personal betrayals, how we value ourselves and others can change everything. If you've ever felt underestimated, let me know in the comments below. Now let's get back to Jerome, who was about to find out just how much his signature was truly worth. Tuesday, October 15th, 2:15 p.m., the third-floor office of Cumberland Valley Financial was a sea of gray cubicles under the relentless, humming glare of fluorescent lights. The air smelled of stale coffee, recycled air, and the faint, papery scent of 1,000,000 documents. Jerome sat at his desk, a small oasis of personal order in the corporate landscape. A framed photo of Maya, grinning with a gap in her teeth, sat next to his monitor. His $89 Timex watch was placed neatly beside his keyboard. He was a risk analyst, and his job was to swim through oceans of data looking for the telltale signs of danger, the over-leveraged client, the flawed projection, the fraudulent application. He was good at it. His mind was built for patterns, for seeing the piece that didn't fit. That afternoon, he was assigned a routine desk review for a portfolio of new commercial loans originated by the downtown branch. It was tedious work. A final check and balance, before the loans were formally entered into the system. He clicked open the first file on his screen, loan number 74-A3882. He pulled the corresponding physical file from the stack beside him. The top sheet was the summary. Innovate Nashville, LLC borrower, loan amount, $2,300,000. Jerome felt a flicker of something. Pride, maybe? Annoyance? It was always strange to see Renata's company in his professional world. He made a mental note to recuse himself from any future analysis of her accounts to avoid a conflict of interest. He scanned the rest of the document. Term, 5 years. Interest rate, prime, plus 2.5%, purpose, expansion, and equipment purchase. It all looked standard for a company on a fast growth trajectory. He turned the page. The next document was the personal guarantee. This was the collateral of last resort, the individual promise to cover the debt if the business defaulted. His eyes scanned the name of the guarantor, and then he stopped. His breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to narrow to the single line of text on the page. Guarantor, Jerome Wallace. It couldn't be. He blinked, thinking the fluorescent lights were playing tricks on him. He looked again. There was his name, his address, the one for their $1.2 million condo on Oakmont Drive, his social security number, and then, at the bottom of the page, was his signature. He recognized the curve of the J, the quick slash of the W. It was his handwriting. He remembered signing something. The one-pager, the formality. But this wasn't a one-page document. This was a thick, dense, 8-page legal contract, filled with clauses about asset seizure and wage garnishment. A cold dread, colder than the air conditioning blowing from the vent above, began to creep up his spine. He had never seen this document before in his life. Yet, there was his signature, clear as day. His hands, usually so steady, trembled as he flipped through the pages of the physical file. And then he found it. Paper clipped to the back of the thick, official 8-page guarantee was a single, separate sheet of paper. It was the one-pager he remembered. The familiar, simple layout, the generic language about being a character witness. It was the exact same form he had signed twice before for the $100,000 line of credit and the $250,000 lease. But this time, it was just a prop, a decoy. She had handed him the simple form, the one he trusted. while the real one, the $2.3 million personal guarantee that put every single thing he owned and would ever earn on the line, was slipped underneath for his signature. The room went silent. The hum of the lights faded. The distant chatter of his colleagues disappeared. All he could hear was the frantic, panicked beating of his own heart. He looked at the loan number again. Number 74-A3882. He looked at his screen. It was a loan from his bank, processed on his floor, and he, a risk analyst, had personally guaranteed it without his knowledge. The fraud was so simple, so audacious, and so deeply personal, it stole the air from his lungs. It wasn't just a business betrayal. It was a violation of his home, his name, his future. It was a betrayal of every pancake he'd ever flipped, every bedtime story he'd ever read, every quiet act of love he had offered in the belief that they were building a life together. In that moment, sitting in his gray cubicle under the gray lights, Jerome Wallace understood. The woman he had married no longer existed. In her place was a stranger who saw him not as a husband or a partner, but as a resource to be exploited, a signature on a dotted line, a nobody who worked at a bank. The drive home from the office that Tuesday was a blur. The familiar streets of Nashville, the glow of the setting sun on the windows of the shops on 12th Avenue South, it all seemed like a movie playing outside his car window. Inside his 2012 Toyota Camry, a car with 187,000 miles on the odometer that he'd paid off years ago, the silence was absolute. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't call anyone. He just drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind a maelstrom of cold, crystalline rage. He replayed the moment in his mind, the feel of the glossy paper of the real guarantee, the cheap, thin texture of the decoy form, the paperclip, that tiny silver piece of metal costing maybe 1/10 of a cent, was the hinge upon which his entire life had just swung. He pulled into the garage of their condo building, the automatic door humming shut behind him, sealing him into the quiet concrete space. He sat in his car for a full 5 minutes, just breathing, in and out. He had a choice. He could storm into the condo, throw the file on the $2,800 dining room table, and unleash the hurricane of fury and hurt that was building inside him. He could scream. He could cry. He could demand an explanation. He pictured the scene, Renata's initial surprise, followed by her practiced dismissiveness. She would call him hysterical. She would say it was a misunderstanding. She would twist it, turn it, and by the end of the night, he would somehow be the one apologizing. He had seen her do it 100 times, to employees, to vendors, to her own parents. He would not give her that satisfaction. He would not give her a scene. Strategic restraint. It was a term from his risk analysis playbook. When you discover a catastrophic vulnerability, you don't sound the alarm and cause a panic. You isolate the threat, you gather your data, and you plan your response quietly and methodically. You act from a position of strength, not from a place of emotional chaos. He got out of the car. He walked to the elevator, his face a calm, neutral mask. When the doors opened to their penthouse unit, the first thing he heard was Maya's laughter. She came running to him, her braids bouncing, and threw her arms around his legs. "Daddy, you're home. We ordered pizza." "Hey, my sweet girl," he said, his voice perfectly normal, even warm. He scooped her up, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of her kid shampoo and the faint smell of the outdoors. It was the only real thing in his world right now. Renata was in the kitchen, directing a delivery guy where to put the 3 large pizza boxes. The pizza cost $85. "Hey, hun," she said, barely looking at him. "Tough day?" "The usual," Jerome said, his voice even. He put Maya down. "Lots of numbers." He walked over to the counter and picked up a slice of pepperoni. It tasted like cardboard in his mouth. "How was your day?" "Insane," she said, pulling out her phone. "The final funding tranche is about to be released. We're officially a $20 million company. The board is ecstatic. We're having a celebratory dinner at Kane Prime on Friday. You don't have to come," she added quickly. "It'll be a late night, all shop talk. You'd be bored." "Okay," he said, chewing the tasteless pizza. "Sounds good." That night, as he lay in their king-sized bed, the space between him and Renata feeling like a vast, icy chasm, he stared at the ceiling. She was asleep within minutes. The soft, even sound of her breathing a grotesque counterpoint to the turmoil in his chest. He thought about the $2.3 million. It was a number so large it was almost abstract. It was more than he would earn in his entire lifetime. It was a chain she had forged for him, link by invisible link, and locked around his neck while he slept. He didn't sleep at all that night. He just lay there, perfectly still, and planned. The next day, Wednesday, he took a personal day. He told Renata he was feeling under the weather. "Don't get Maya sick," was her only response. At 9 a.m., he was not in bed, but in a coffee shop in a different neighborhood, drinking a $4.50 black coffee and making a phone call. He had made a photocopy of the entire loan file, every single page, including the paperclip decoy, before leaving the office. The 25-cent cost of the copies felt like the best investment he'd ever made. Thursday was more of the same. He went to work. He came home. He helped Maya with her homework, a simple worksheet about adding and subtracting. He listened as Renata talked on the phone about stock options and vesting schedules. He played dumb. He was a ghost in his own life, an actor playing the part of the dutiful, oblivious husband. Each lie, each moment of feigned normalcy, was a scene in a play only he was watching. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He was dying inside. But on the outside, he was just Jerome. Nobody you'd know. The guy who works at a bank. And that, he was beginning to realize, was his greatest strength. On Wednesday morning at 10:30 a.m., Jerome sat in a leather armchair that probably cost more than his suit. The chair was in the 40th floor office of Miller, Thompson, and Finch, a law firm whose name was synonymous with brutal, high-stakes corporate litigation in Nashville. The air was different up here. It was thin and quiet, smelling of old leather, lemon polish, and money. The view from the floor-to-ceiling window was panoramic, looking down on the very building where Innovate Nashville had its headquarters. Across a massive mahogany desk sat a man named David Thompson. He was one of the founding partners, a sharp, formidable black man in his late 50s, with a reputation for being a shark in a city of dolphins. He wore a flawlessly tailored suit that likely cost $10,000 and spoke in a low, precise voice that commanded attention. Jerome had been referred to him by a senior vice president at his own bank, a man who owed Jerome a favor after he'd discreetly saved him from a disastrous compliance issue years ago. "So, Mr. Wallace," Thompson began, his eyes scanning the documents Jerome had laid out on the desk, "tell me again what happened, from the beginning." Jerome took a breath. He had spent the morning rehearsing this, making sure he had the facts straight, devoid of the emotional hurricane that had been raging inside him for the past 24 hours. "My wife, Renata Wallace, is the CEO of a tech company called Innovate Nashville," he started, his voice steady. "They were securing a round of funding. Part of that was a $2.3 million commercial loan from Cumberland Valley Financial." Thompson nodded, not looking up from the papers. "My firm has done some work for CVF. Good bank. Conservative." "Yes, sir. As part of the loan conditions, the bank required a personal guarantee. My wife presented me with what I believe to be a simple character witness form, a one-page document. It's this one here." Jerome pointed to the photocopy of the flimsy decoy form. She had used the same form twice before for smaller business loans. I trusted her. I signed it. "And you didn't read it?" Thompson asked, his tone neutral. I glanced at it. It looked identical to the previous ones. I had no reason to suspect otherwise. Jerome felt a flash of the old humiliation. I was complacent. "You were trusting," Thompson corrected him, finally looking up. His gaze was intense, analytical. "There's a difference. Go on." "Yesterday, during a routine desk review at my job, I'm a risk analyst at CVF's corporate office, I was assigned the file for this loan. That's when I discovered the document I actually signed was not the one-page form. It was this." He pushed the copy of the 8-page, ironclad personal guarantee forward. It was attached to the one-page form by a paperclip. My signature is on the final page of the 8-page contract. I have never seen the preceding 7 pages before in my life. Thompson leaned back in his chair, making a small steeple with his fingers. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the 2 documents. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant sound of traffic from 40 floors below. Jerome's heart was pounding. "Fraudulent inducement," Thompson said finally, the words cutting through the quiet. "Sir?" "It's a legal term," Thompson explained, leaning forward again. He picked up the 2 documents, holding them side by side. "Fraudulent inducement occurs when a person is deceived into signing an agreement by a misrepresentation of the facts. Your wife, or her representatives, intentionally used this simple familiar document," he tapped the one-pager, "to trick you into signing this much more serious and binding one." He tapped the 8-page contract. The fact that they used the same decoy form on previous, legitimate occasions only strengthens the case. It establishes a pattern of behavior designed to make you lower your guard. It's premeditated, it's sophisticated, and it is unequivocally illegal. A wave of relief so profound it almost made Jerome dizzy washed over him. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't just an idiot who didn't read the fine print. He was a victim of a calculated deception. "So what can we do?" Jerome asked, his voice barely a whisper. Thompson's expression turned grim. "The first step is to nullify the guarantee. We will file a notice of withdrawal with the bank, effective immediately. On the grounds of fraudulent inducement, we will state that your signature was obtained under false pretenses and that you are voiding the agreement. We need to do this before the final funds are dispersed," which you said is Friday? "Yes," Jerome confirmed. "Renata mentioned a celebration dinner on Friday night." "Good. Time is on our side, but barely." Thompson was already buzzing his assistant. "Cynthia, I need you to clear my calendar for the rest of the day and get me lead counsel for Cumberland Valley Financial on the phone." "Not the branch manager, the head guy downtown?" He turned back to Jerome. "This is going to get messy, Mr. Wallace, and expensive. My retainer is $25,000. My hourly rate is $1,200. Jerome didn't even flinch. He had spent the morning transferring the bulk of his personal savings, a total of $48,300 he had carefully built up over 15 years, into his checking account. "That won't be a problem," he said, pulling a checkbook from his worn leather wallet. As he wrote out the check for $25,000, his hand was perfectly steady. The number felt different now. It wasn't just money. It was ammunition. "What happens after we notify the bank?" Jerome asked. "The bank's legal team will immediately freeze the loan's dispersal to investigate the claim. When they see our evidence, the 2 forms, the pattern of deceit, your position within their own company, they will almost certainly side with us to avoid liability. They will recall the $2.3 million loan from Innovate Nashville." Thompson paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "And your wife's company will have a very, very big problem." Jerome nodded slowly. He looked out the window at the gleaming tower where Renata was probably celebrating, oblivious. The cold, clear calm he'd felt at the gala settled over him again. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about anger or hurt feelings anymore. This was about consequences. It was a risk analysis of his own life, and he was finally ready to mitigate the threat. The days leading up to the gala were a masterclass in deception. Jerome moved through his life like a phantom, his body performing the familiar rituals of home while his mind was elsewhere, deep in the trenches of legal strategy with David Thompson. He'd leave for work at his usual time, but instead of going to the bank, he'd spend hours in a conference room at Miller, Thompson, and Finch, poring over documents and preparing his affidavit. The legal fees were mounting, already cresting $40,000, as Thompson's team worked around the clock. But Jerome didn't care. It was the cost of his freedom. The gala was on a Thursday night. As he stood in their bedroom, knotting the tie of his $400 suit, Renata breezed in, a whirlwind of perfume and silk. She was wearing the $12,000 crimson gown, and she looked radiant, her deep brown skin glowing against the rich color. She was also talking on her phone, a diamond-encrusted case glinting under the lights. No, the final wire from CVF comes through tomorrow before close of business, she was saying. Everything is set. This time tomorrow we'll be popping champagne that costs more than your car, darling. She laughed, a sound that now grated on Jerome's nerves like metal on stone. She caught his eye in the mirror and put a hand over the phone's receiver. "You look nice," she said, the word hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken qualifiers. "Nice for you. Nice for a man who works at a bank. Try not to embarrass me tonight, okay? Stick to the sidelines. Mingle with the caterers." "I will," he said, his voice a flat, emotionless landscape. He looked at his reflection. His face was a mask of placid obedience, but his eyes, if you looked closely, held the cold, hard gleam of a man who had nothing left to lose. He knew what was coming. He knew that in less than 24 hours, the empire she was so proudly celebrating would begin to crumble. And he was the one holding the hammer. The gala unfolded exactly as he knew it would. The forced photo, the dismissal to the staff table, the casual, soul-crushing cruelty of her words to the board member, the man with the $100,000 Patek Philippe. "That's nobody you'd know, he just works at a bank." He set his glass down. It was time. He didn't make a scene. He simply stood up, walked out of the ballroom, took the elevator down 34 floors, and caught a taxi home. He was packing a bag when Renata finally stumbled in around 2 a.m., flush with success and expensive champagne. "You left?" she asked, kicking off her $1,500 Christian Louboutin heels. "God, Jerome, you are so antisocial. It's embarrassing." "I was tired," he said, zipping the bag. It contained a few changes of clothes, his laptop, and the framed photo of Maya from his desk. "Whatever," she slurred, waving a hand. "Don't be a baby. The biggest day of my life is tomorrow. Don't ruin it with your mood." She passed out on their bed, still in her $12,000 dress. He watched her for a moment, this stranger who wore his wife's face. He felt a pang of something. Not love, not sadness, but a deep, hollow ache for the woman she used to be, for the life they were supposed to have. He walked over to the bed, gently took the phone from her limp hand, and placed it on the nightstand. Then he walked out of the bedroom, out of the condo, and out of her life. He drove to a modest, prepaid extended-stay hotel near the airport, a room that cost $89 a night. He slept better than he had in years. Friday, 4:30 p.m. In the 40th floor office of Miller, Thompson and Finch, the atmosphere was tense. Jerome sat beside David Thompson. A junior associate was on the phone with a contact inside the wire transfer department of Cumberland Valley Financial. On a large screen, they could see the tracking information for the $2.3 million wire transfer. Status: pending final authorization. They close at 5, Thompson said, looking at his own watch, a much more modest, but still respectable $5,000 Omega. The branch manager has to give the final sign-off. At 4:45 p.m., the associate said, "He's back from his meeting. He's at his desk." "Now," Thompson commanded. He hit a button on his console. "Send the package." An email, meticulously crafted and laden with attachments, was sent simultaneously to the head of CVF's legal department, the bank's chief compliance officer, and the CEO's executive assistant. The subject line was simple: urgent. Notice of withdrawal of guarantee on loan number 74-A3882. At 4:47 p.m., a second email was sent directly to the branch manager, who was about to authorize the transfer. This one was from the bank's own chief counsel. The subject line was even simpler: do not authorize wire transfer number 74-A3882. Cease all action. Await instructions. On the screen in Thompson's office, the status of the wire transfer flickered. Then it changed. Status: canceled. Jerome let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for 3 days. It was done. The first domino had fallen. Thompson leaned back and looked at Jerome. Now the real work begins. Go home, Mr. Wallace. Get some rest. Monday is going to be a very interesting day. Jerome thought of Renata, probably at her celebratory dinner at Kane Prime, raising a $300 bottle of champagne, completely unaware that the ground had just vanished from beneath her feet. He thought of her phone, which would soon start to light up with confused, then frantic calls from the bank. He felt a brief, sharp pang of something that might have been pity. But it passed. This wasn't cruelty. This was a consequence. A perfectly calculated, fully justified consequence. Have you ever had to make a decision where the right thing to do was also the hardest? The world often tells us to be loud when we're angry, but sometimes the most powerful statement is a quiet, deliberate action. Share your thoughts on this in the comments. The weekend was about to be very long for Renata, but for Jerome, it was the beginning of peace. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a series of quiet, devastating implosions. Jerome experienced it from a distance, through the calm, precise updates from David Thompson's office. He spent the weekend in his anonymous $89 a night hotel room, ordering room service and watching old movies. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. The only interruption was a carefully coordinated visit with Maya on Saturday afternoon. He had Thompson's firm send a formal request to Renata's new lawyer, she had hired one by Saturday morning, to pick up Maya for a few hours. They met at a neutral location, a Starbucks on Lexington, where a grim-faced Renata handed over Maya's small backpack without making eye contact. Jerome took Maya to the park. They fed the ducks. They got ice cream. He didn't say a word about the situation. He just focused on her, on the sound of her laughter and the feel of her small hand in his. He was following the first rule of the child safety protocol his lawyer had laid out. The child must always be safe, loved, and emotionally secure, completely shielded from the adult conflict. When he dropped her back off, Maya hugged him tight. "Are you coming home soon, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small. "I'm always with you, sweet girl, no matter where I'm sleeping," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I love you more than all the stars." It was the truth. It was the only truth that mattered. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Renata and her chief financial officer arrived at the downtown branch of Cumberland Valley Financial for a meeting they had demanded. They walked into the conference room expecting to find the branch manager and perhaps a regional vice president. They were prepared for a fight, armed with printouts of their company's valuation and threats of taking their business elsewhere. Instead, they found David Thompson and two of his associates already seated at the table. On the screen at the head of the room was a single name, an external counsel for the bank, video conferenced in from Charlotte. The branch manager was nowhere in sight. Renata's face, as described later to Jerome by Thompson, went from aggressive confidence to pale confusion. "Who are you?" she demanded, looking at Thompson. "Where's the manager?" "I am David Thompson. I represent Jerome Wallace," Thompson said, his voice calm and even. "And we are here to discuss the fraudulent inducement related to the personal guarantee on loan number 74-A3882. He then proceeded to lay out the evidence, piece by damning piece. The two forms, the established pattern, the sworn affidavit from Jerome. The bank's lawyer on the screen was stone-faced. The bank's primary concern was its own liability. They had an employee, a risk analyst, who was the victim of a fraudulent act related to one of their own loans. It was a legal and public relations nightmare. The decision was swift and brutal. The $2.3 million loan was officially and irrevocably recalled. This was the first domino in the cascade of consequences. 1. The vendor breach. Innovate Nashville had already signed contracts with a major hardware vendor based on the imminent arrival of the $2.3 million. A purchase order for $340,000 worth of new servers was now in breach. The vendor, a notoriously aggressive company, immediately filed a lawsuit for the full amount plus damages, freezing a significant portion of Innovate Nashville's operating capital. 2. The board review. The news of a recalled loan and a major lawsuit sent shockwaves through the company's board of directors. The same silver-haired man with the $100,000 watch who had asked about Jerome at the Gala now led an emergency board meeting. They were venture capitalists. They invested in growth, not in scandal and legal turmoil. They immediately launched a formal investigation into Renata's conduct and management practices. 3. The financial collapse. With the loan gone and its capital frozen by the lawsuit, Innovate Nashville's cash flow dried up almost overnight. They missed payroll the following Friday. The lead programmer who had turned down a $180,000 offer abruptly resigned, followed by 3 other key engineers. The company's burn rate, which Renata had once boasted about, now became a funeral pyre. 4. The reputation. Nashville's tech and business community is tight-knit. The story spread like wildfire, not through press releases but through whispers at private clubs, texts between executives, and calls between lawyers. The official story was funding complications. The unofficial story, the one that mattered, was that Renata Wallace was untrustworthy. Her carefully curated image as a visionary entrepreneur evaporated in a single week. She had performed a masterful act of self-immolation. 5. The personal assets. The condo on Oakmont Drive was in both their names, but the mortgage payments were automatically drawn from Renata's account, an account that was now frozen. Jerome, through his lawyer, formally relinquished his claim to the property in exchange for Renata assuming the full $980,000 remaining on the mortgage, a debt she could no longer service. The bank foreclosed within 3 months. Her white BMW 3 Series, with a monthly lease payment of $950, was repossessed from the parking garage of her new, much smaller, rented apartment. Her collection of designer clothes, the $2,400 Burberry dresses and $8,700 Armani suits, began appearing on luxury consignment websites for pennies on the dollar. Jerome watched it all from his quiet distance. He felt no joy, no schadenfreude. He only felt a profound sense of gravity, the inevitable and crushing pull of consequences. She had built her empire on a foundation of deceit, using his trust as the cornerstone. And when he had calmly, quietly removed that stone, the entire glittering facade had come crashing down. 16 months later. The rain fell in soft, steady sheets against the window of Jerome's new office, blurring the view of the budding community garden below. The sound was soothing, a gentle rhythm that matched the quiet hum of his new life. The office wasn't on the 40th floor of a glass tower. It was on the second floor of a beautifully restored brick building in the heart of East Nashville. The furniture wasn't mahogany and leather. It was simple, functional, and locally made. The air didn't smell of money. It smelled of fresh paint, brewing coffee, and possibility. A small drawing was taped to the side of his computer monitor. It was done in brown and black crayon on construction paper. It showed two figures. One was a tall man with a big smile. The other was a little girl with braids that had little yellow circles on the ends, holding his hand. Above them, in a child's wobbly script, it said, "My daddy, the boss." Maya had drawn it for him on his first day. It was his most valuable possession. Jerome was no longer a mid-level analyst. He was a founding partner. After the divorce was finalized, a quiet, uncontested affair in which Renata, humbled and financially broken, had agreed to all his terms, he had taken his portion of their liquidated assets, a modest sum of just over $150,000, and pooled it with the life savings of two other veteran black bankers who, like him, had grown tired of the corporate glass ceiling. Together, they had done something radical. They had started a bank. The East Nashville Community Credit Union wasn't designed to fund tech startups with multi-million-dollar burn rates. It was designed to give $5,000 microloans to women starting home-based businesses. It was there to provide fair mortgages to families the big banks overlooked. It existed to fund the dreams of the people in the neighborhood, the people who were just like him. Once upon a time, he worked harder than he ever had in his life, but for the first time, the work felt like it mattered. His salary was barely more than it had been before, but his equity in the credit union was growing, slowly and solidly, like the vegetables in the garden outside. He lived in a small, rented two-bedroom apartment a few blocks away. It was less than a third the size of the old condo, but it was filled with light, laughter, and the smell of his cooking. He had Maya from Thursday to Sunday every week. Their life was simple. They did homework at the kitchen table. They went to the park. They had movie nights with popcorn. He was happy, genuinely, peacefully happy. One afternoon, a brief article appeared in the Nashville Business Journal's online edition. It was a short, 300-word piece about the success of the new credit union and its impact on the local community. It included a photo of the three founding partners. Jerome was in the middle, smiling, wearing a simple but well-fitting suit. The final paragraph read, "Leading the charge is Jerome Wallace, a former risk analyst whose quiet expertise and deep commitment to community-first banking are being hailed as a new model for ethical finance in the city." Across town, in a cramped cubicle at a third-party logistics company where she now worked as a mid-level account manager for $45,000 a year, Renata Wallace received an email. It was from the silver-haired board member, the one with the Patek Philippe watch. They hadn't spoken in over a year, not since he had presided over the dismantling of her company. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained only a single, unadorned link. She clicked it. The article from the Business Journal filled her screen. Her eyes landed on the photo of Jerome, smiling, successful, respected. Her Jerome, the man she had dismissed, humiliated, and tried to ruin. She read the final line about his quiet expertise. Then her gaze fell on the headline. Founding partner Jerome Wallace on the true value of $1. A moment later, a second email from the same board member arrived. This one had a message. 6 simple words. He works at a bank. Renata stared at the screen, the fluorescent lights of her own gray, anonymous office, glinting off the tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of fact. It was a final, devastating accounting of what she had lost. He did work at a bank. He just happened to own it. True wealth isn't measured in stock options or company valuations. It's not found in expensive cars or designer clothes. True wealth is character. It's integrity. It's the love of a child and the respect of your community. It's the quiet satisfaction of building something real and meaningful, brick by brick, with your own two hands. Jerome Wallace had lost a fortune, but he had found his wealth. What does true wealth mean to you? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for being a part of the Love Beyond Pride community.